So welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. It's good to be able to participate virtually in this Rohatsu retreat. And it's good to be here in my university classroom. I have my university students here as well. So the title of my talk this time around is This Means You, by which I mean that everything in Zen is practical. It's not theoretical. You have to do it. Therefore, I think many people, they do the basic practice and they listen to the teachings, but they don't realize that you have to put the whole thing into practice or it doesn't function. You have to adjust the way you approach your life if you really want it to work. I mean, meditation alone will make you calmer and a little more clear-headed, but there's so much more to it than that. As I see those of you sitting in the group room, most of you are very experienced, so you all know this. And my university students have had me for a whole semester, so they all know it too. So this is the Rohatsu Sesshin, or retreat, is a commemoration of the Buddha's enlightenment, which was said to have happened on December 8th, I think. How they know that, who knows? But anyway, it's just like, do they know when Jesus was born on the 25th of December? I think it's known he was born in the summer and they just move things around. But, time's relative, so it's okay. This is when we celebrate the fact that the Buddha became enlightened. Yesterday we had a talk from Shishin Roshi on the life of the Buddha, and in Zen and Buddhism in general, as those of you who longtime practitioners know, there are said to be three treasures of Zen, or three jewels of Buddhism, and the three treasures of the Buddha, that's the teacher; the Dharma, that's the teachings, and the Sangha, that's the community. So tomorrow we'll have a talk by Shinko Roshi on the Sangha, on the community, importance of the community. This is said to be the formula for effective practice, is the teacher, the teachings, and a community of support. So my job today is to talk about the Dharma, which is the teachings themselves. The teachings are freely available. They're the most freely available, I think, of the three treasures. Of course, in the biggest sense, the Dharma means law, or the truth, or wisdom, or the teachings. And the chant that we just delivered and heard says the Dharma is always encountered but rarely perceived, even in millions of ages. It means it's all around us all the time, but many of us don't see it. Many of us don't see reality as it is, the actuality of our experience as it is. So the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree for a week, it said, and having already mastered all the known forms of meditation, and having even been told that he was finished, was enlightened, and should become a teacher, he didn't feel finished. He didn't feel fully enlightened. And so the story goes that after 6 years of trying all the practices available to him, he decided to sit under the Bodhi tree for a week as long as it took to become enlightened, which to him, the question that he was holding in heart and mind was the question of suffering. Why do human beings suffer? Why is life tough? Why is it so hard here on planet Earth for human beings? I mean, that's the question that we're all working with, right? Like, what's going on here? Don't seem quite right. It seems a little out of whack, right? Um, so, so the Buddha used the concentration practices that he'd learned from the meditation methods of the time, which he continued to teach all his life. But he sat down with the question of suffering and what one could do about it. And I guess if you wanted to boil down what he came up with, what his enlightenment was, well, a number of things. But as far as what he what he derived from his experience of enlightenment that he could share with others, you could boil it down to pain is unavoidable in life, but suffering is optional. So the Dharma, the practices of the Dharma, Zazen, the meditation practices, are about how do we overcome that part of suffering that's optional, that we add to life's inevitable difficulties. There are difficulties in life. If we live long enough, we're not, well, even if we live a short time, we're going to face pain. Sometime we're going to face difficulty. But how about all the stuff we add to difficulty? How about all the ways we multiply our difficulties by what we do with our minds and our hearts? That's what the practice is about. It's sometimes said that, well, the First Noble Truth, that the Buddha's first teaching when he went on to teach is, as Shisha Roshi said yesterday, is that there's suffering in all of life. If you live, you're going to suffer. You're going to have difficulty, right? And sometimes people look at Buddhism and they think, well, that's depressing. Actually, the whole point of the practices is to get beyond suffering. So you could just as easily say it's realistic. Why don't we look at what the problem is? There's no suffering. What's the problem, right? There's no suffering in life. There's no problem. That's the whole problem, right? So the whole point is to look at what the difficulty is squarely in the face. The fact that we have trouble in life. The way I like to translate the First Noble Truth for my university classes is trouble is normal. And young people, especially when they come to class, sometimes they have this idea because of everything we see on TV and advertisements and such, that if they're having trouble in life, that there's something wrong with them, that that it's their fault. And sometimes I really get to see the lights go on with someone when everybody in the class starts talking and this person realizes, wait a minute, everyone has trouble. It just comes with the turf. There's air, there's water, there's earth, there's trouble, right? It's the sixth or seventh element, depending on your system, right? Trouble's normal. But suffering sounds like such a big word. Most of what we face in life is a little more subtle than that. It's this, how many of us, I wonder, I'd like to see a show of hands among my university people and also among you all who are doing the retreat, how many people have this just perfectly clear sense that life is perfect, beautiful, just right, marvelous, incredible, how wonderful life is. But somehow we can't quite reach that wonderful, if we could only get through this week, then we get to the wonderfulness, right? Because we've got this long list of stuff we have to get past and these stressful things, right? It's like, how many people know what I'm talking about? You have this experience, this feeling that life is just beautiful and perfect, but we can't quite get there, right? So this is a lot of what brings many of us to practice. It's like, if only I could get through this, just this mess of this week or this month, then I'll be in the clear. But that's not what life requires of us, because we're never going to be perfectly in the clear. Trouble has come before, it will come again. And the way of practice is to accept whatever comes. So I sometimes characterize meditation or Zazen practice as the practice of reality. It means we bring our attention back to our present moment experience again and again and again, because that's the only place where life is actually happening, right? Our head is full of imaginations of other times and places. And but that's all projection and imagination. What's actually happening is exactly happening now, right? So in a very real sense, I'm spending my entire life with all of you who are listening now. And you're very nice people to spend my whole life with. Thank you for agreeing to do this, right? It's every moment's kind of a big deal. Every moment is the reality of our life. So meditation is not just the stress reduction breathing practice, right? It's about contacting the reality of our life and letting go of the mental and emotional projections that can kind of contaminate this moment with memories of past moments, anticipations of future moments. Is anything wrong with this moment? Anybody got a complaint about this moment right now? Anything really wrong with it? Are there some days that are just filled with moments like this where nothing bad happens? Yeah, sure there are. If you look at our life moment to moment to moment to moment, most of the time it's just fine. There's no problem, right? But even on a day where nothing bad happens, how often do we not find some way to make ourselves suffer, right? We'll import into a day where there's nothing wrong whatsoever, or moments where there's nothing wrong whatsoever. These thoughts of what might happen or what has happened in the past, right? And so if our minds, I like to characterize the mind as, it's like a wild horse, right? And most of us come into adulthood with these wild horse minds, and they just run all over the place. So meditation is a way we have to train the horse, to take the reins of the horse. Now, can you trust any horse 100%, even a well-trained one? No, any horse can be startled by something and can throw you. And in the same way, any mind can be hooked by something and can throw us, right? But nonetheless, you're much better off with a well-trained horse or a well-trained mind than you are with one that's running wild, right? So we'll still get thrown every once in a while, but a lot of us come into life getting thrown every day, getting thrown several times a day, right? So we often say that the Dharma, that the meat of the practice is about overcoming suffering, but it's more subtle than that. It's more this feeling that life's out of kilter a little bit. You know what I mean? The original term, the Indian term for what's often translated as suffering, is called dukkha, which is the original Pali term. It may be the same in Sanskrit. Dukkha has the connotation of a wheel, like on an ox cart being out of round. So every time it goes around, it clunks. There's friction, right? So dukkha could be said to be talking about the friction in life. What's this feeling of friction, or being also the wheel's out of kilter, right? That's why I use that term, out of kilter, right? If you've ever tried to ride your bike when the wheel's a little bit bent or something, you get this clunk, clunk, clunk. Doesn't life feel like that? It's like clunks along at times, right? It doesn't tend to roll smoothly. It might be for a little while. It might roll smoothly, but eventually here comes the clunk again, right? So we all recognize some degree of this out of kilterness, or at least some possibility of this perfection that we glimpse in life. Or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing this practice, right? What calls us to do this practice? I mean, otherwise, I don't know what we'd be doing. We'd all be happily barbecuing in Des Moines or something. I don't know. What do people do who don't feel like there's got to be something else other than this, right? Isn't that a lot of what brings us to this practice? So pain, we can't escape pain. We can take steps to have less pain in our life. We certainly can, but nonetheless, we're going to have it sometimes. There's pain of loss. There's pain of betrayal. There's pain in relationships. Who doesn't know that one, right? Um, there's pain when your soft body hits something hard in the world, and that's going to happen. But suffering is optional. So the extra stuff we add to it is what we're working with here, which is actually most of what causes us suffering. The pains of life are in general manageable if we're practitioners. We develop a mind and heart that's spacious enough to contain all of this, that's able to contain the difficulties of life as well as the joys. I mean, as I just said, is this moment okay? Aren't most moments okay? You know, I've been teaching university classes in meditation for going on 20 years. I'll ask this question a lot. If you had to rate this moment on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being like complete ecstasy, I don't know, bungee jumping while on LSD and having an orgasm all at once. Okay, 10 on the pleasure scale, right? And 1 is absolute pain. You know, having a tooth, a root canal with no Novocaine while you have a migraine headache. You know, that 1's absolute pain, 10's absolute, you know, peak experience pleasure. Actually, the bungee jumping thing doesn't sound that pleasurable to me. But don't try this in your home. But anyway, you know what I mean, the peak experience. If you had to characterize this moment of how pleasant or unpleasant it is, most people would say it's like a 6, maybe a 7, you know, which means it's just this side of, it's just on the upside of down. If you really look at your life moment to moment, there's a quiet pleasure at just inhabiting our life when we're not actively suffering. And, you know, I'd like to ask also in my classes, which beings inhabit the world along with us that seem to know this, and when they're not actively suffering and they have everything that they need to sustain them, seem pretty happy with their lives. Usually people will say dogs, cats, and then someone will realize, wait, all of them. Yeah, it's only human beings after a certain age that have the capacity to ruin perfectly good moments by the way we use our minds, right? Our minds are incredible tools, don't get me wrong. We're all sitting in a room that was designed by that aspect of the human mind that can plan and carry out plans. And that's an important part of what makes us human, you know. But it's also that part of that planning, linear, logical side of our mind it's great for doing things like building rooms or building houses, designing things, even ending smallpox. But, you know, that's one thing humans have done with that mind. That's pretty great. But it's not very good when it comes to figuring out the meaning of life. And it's not very good in figuring out how to love well, for instance, or even what love is, you know. We wouldn't be able to explain through a mathematical formula to another person what love is. We could explain how to build a room, but we couldn't explain what love is if they haven't known it. If the person's never been in love, the only way to experience it is falling in love, right? So when it comes to the meaning of our lives, the deep meaning of our lives, that's what we're practicing with our meditation practice. And it's something that we have to be experienced. It has to be experienced. It can't be explained or thought through or formula created. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a formula created for it, like E equals MC squared? If somebody could come up with a formula, and we just enact the formula, and there we are. Life's grand, everything's perfect, right? We have to, if we want to free ourselves from suffering, and if we want to experience oneness, which is the bigger part, what's sometimes called the spiritual part of our practice, then we have to practice. It just doesn't come to us without us actually, I think it comes to all of us. We all have glimpses of it, but that oneness. but it doesn't become a part of our life that we can enact and live into in general if we haven't done some sort of work on ourselves, some sort of practice. So the second truth that the Buddha shared is that the cause of this out of kilterness or suffering or difficulty in life is, it's most commonly translated, as we all know, as grasping or clinging or thirst. Sometimes it's translated as desire, but it's a little more complex than that. There's nothing wrong with desire. Well, we're not going to escape it anyway, right? Well, all humans have desires, but it's about the clinging to things, thinking we have to grasp something and have it or we're not going to be happy, right? That's one of the things that causes suffering. Its close cousin is aversion, the opposite, right? Pushing away. This thing I want, I'm grabbing after it. This thing I don't want, I'm pushing it away. So you could boil it down in a different way to say what causes our suffering is either not getting what we want or getting what we don't want, right? If we react to that in a certain way, that's what causes our suffering. The practice is all about dealing with the inevitable fact that we're going to sometimes not get what we want and we're going to sometimes get what we don't want. So does that have to cause suffering? If you get down to brass tacks, that's what it's about, right? Another way to view it is being at odds with life. Do we want life to be some other way? Then it is. This is something that caused me suffering for a really long time. In 1986, when I was 29 years old, I walked across the country with this group called the Great Peace March for Nuclear Disarmament. It took us 9 months and we walked more than 3,000 miles. And it was a great thing to do, of course, and I believe it had some impact. I mean, that was only a few years before the Berlin Wall came down. Our march of 600 activists for nuclear disarmament spawned a march of Soviet citizens in the United States and a march of Soviet citizens and American citizens in the Soviet Union, in Russia, that was actually allowed by Russian authorities. And these were subsequent years after 1986, and I believe it's 89 that the Berlin Wall came down. So, which came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know, but they were. Let's just say these things were interconnected. The fact that there was this activism happening, and the fact that the Soviet Union, the Cold War ended. I was going to say I'm not going to take credit for it, but no, I'll take credit for it. Why not? Isn't that what the ego does? Oh, I did it, right? The reason I bring that up is because this was a good thing to do, and I do think that these things have some effect, for sure. We don't always know what effects. We can't be attached to the outcome. We just do right action. And we have to let the outcome take care of itself. But this was a time when I was very idealistic and I really wanted the world to change. And I went through a lot of pain when it didn't change the way I wanted it to. And recent events in our country seem to underscore that fact that they're going to keep not changing the way I want them to. But then that's why this practice was developed. This practice was developed because life did not seem satisfactory to people. It seemed like it ought to be some other way. I spent a lot of years thinking it ought to be some other way. And I finally realized that if I wanted a life that I can love and appreciate, like Shishin Roshi said yesterday, Maizumi Roshi, his teacher, was always saying, appreciate your life. If you want a life you can appreciate or even love, well, it better be this life, right? Because we're not going to be issued another one near as we know. It's like if I don't like this one, it's not like I can take it back to Walmart and, return it for a refund. It's like, this is the life we got. So you want to love and be satisfied and appreciate your life, well, you better appreciate the one you have, right? I mean, it's obvious, isn't it, in a way? But somehow we overlook that fact, and we're always thinking, this isn't the right life. Let's have a different one. Let's push this one away. When I say life, I'm talking about not just my life, but the way the world is. The fact that the world is filled with suffering. I struggled with that so much for years. It caused me so much pain. And I finally realized, why should the world be the way I want it to? Just because I could imagine it being some other way? I mean, if I tried to design it to be some other way, there'd be other problems I probably anticipated. I don't want that job, There's this story, actually, about why the world is the way it is. There's this Jewish story. I don't know if you've heard it. It's that the original creation, in the original creation, God made 7 vessels of gold, of perfect vessels of gold. And that was going to turn into the world. But I don't know, God had been working up all night working on these vessels of gold or something, I don't know what, but the story goes that God dropped the vessels and they shattered. And so we don't have a perfect world, but what happened when they shattered is all those bits of gold went everywhere. So everything's got a little twinkle of gold in it. And that includes all the things we might think of as negative. This reminds me of another story. I live in New Mexico, and New Mexico's got a rivalry with Texas. So you're going to have to forgive me this story, but the New Mexican story goes this way, that when God was making all the states, he was getting really tired, and he stuck this one really big one, which was supposed to be like the biggest one of all, and he stuck it in the oven, and he was so tired, he just nodded out, he fell asleep. By the time he remembered, Gabriel woke him up and said, God, come through the oven, oh my God. This thing's overbaked, and they pull out this giant steak, which is just like flat and scorched and burnt and featureless. And Gabriel said, well, we're going to have to throw this away, God, aren't we? And God says, no, we're on a big deadline. We got to keep this. Tell you what, we're just going to call it Texas. So that's the God in Texas joke. But God has a good point there, right? He learned to accept the imperfect creation, right? And we have no choice except to accept the imperfect creation, which actually has that glimmer of gold in every part of it, if we look closely enough. So the reason grasping doesn't work, and the reason grasping, even though it can provide momentary pleasure, if we manage to grasp what we want, right? But the problem is everything's imperfect, so nothing you grasp in that way can be kept, right? So you have that glorious experience of bungee jumping on LSD while having an orgasm. And how long does it last? A minute, right? And then you want to repeat it again, right? You run back to the top of the bridge, you take another tab of acid, and off you go again. It's like, what are you going to do? Keep trying to repeat this experience? It doesn't add up to anything, does it? That's not to say we can't appreciate pleasures. The Zen path doesn't have a lot of strictures against pleasure. We're allowed to marry, we're allowed to have relationships, we're allowed to have a glass of wine if we want. There's no prohibitions against pleasure, but it's different when we grasp it, right? So aversion has a similar problem, right? Because we can't push anything away permanently. It has a way of coming back, doesn't it? So things like pain, we can push it away, but trouble, we try and push it away. It's going to come back. It's going to visit us again, right? We can't push our mortality. Sometimes I if you move in meditation circles, especially in Taos, sometimes you run into people who will say, "Oh, I'm just manifesting everything I want. It's all in the mind. Whatever I think of, I can have." And you know, I always say to them, "Okay, manifest a life where no matter how old you get, you'll never have a problem with any of your teeth." I mean, maybe for 5 years it might be that way, or 10 years, but eventually you live long enough, you're going to have some problem with one of your teeth, right? Manifest a life where you're never going to die. You can, we do co-create our reality in certain ways, but not in that way. We're not in charge of the whole thing, So the solution in practice is said to be to practice non-attachment. And this is a bit of a thorny term. It doesn't mean detachment, it doesn't mean not caring, which is just like the translation suffering, just like the translation desire. This is often translated as detachment, and then people think that Buddhism means you're supposed to not care about anything, and that just is not the case whatsoever. Non-attachment's a different thing. I'll ask for a show of hands again here. How many people have ever been a parent or had a parent? Okay, right, everyone. So everyone's seen this experience of a parent that's too controlling, right? That's too attached to their love for their either we've done it or we've experienced it or we've seen it, right? When a parent is too controlling, too attached to their child, it doesn't work out well, does it? The child ends up knuckling under, and that doesn't look very good. Sometimes you see adults who've knuckled under their whole lives to their parents, and that doesn't tend to look very good. And or they rebel and they have a schism, and then they never talk to each other again, and we've all seen that happen. So we all know what it's like. Or how about that person that you were so attracted to that you were sure they were equally attracted to you and you just had to have them? Does that ever work? If you go after someone you're attracted to with that kind of graspy mind, usually they flee the other way as fast as they can. And if they don't and you get them, boy, you're in for trouble, right? You don't want that kind of relationship, right? You want to be able to love open-handedly, and that's what non-attachment means. It means you appreciate the pleasures of life. When they're there, you don't try and grasp them so that they stay forever, because they're not going to. But you appreciate them all the more deeply because they're ephemeral, because they're passing. You appreciate the loved ones and the love that you have in your life. But you don't try and grab and control and dominate, right? So that's what non-attachment is meant to be. So most of these problems, you may have noticed, if we're sitting here in Zazen, if we're sitting in meditation and we're completely saturated with the reality of this present moment, we don't want anything. To want something means we have to start thinking about what we want, right? So in Zazen, this is a great life hack. We let go of our thoughts. We let go of our thoughts and we return to reality, because present moment reality, there are exceptions. I do not deny that there are really bad moments in life. There are, but are they the majority? Far from it. Most are just like this. Most are just like this, neutral or just on the upside of down, And every once in a while, there's a really bad moment, But we tend to ruin the good ones by hauling our memories or anticipations of bad moments into them, right? Or other things like judging ourselves, putting ourselves down. I'm not as good as, you know what it's like when you're sitting in the meditation hall. You look over at Corinne and you think, oh, look how she's sitting. She's sitting so well. She's probably enlightened already. I'll never be as enlightened as Corinne. No. Or you look over at her and you think she's not sitting right. I'm sitting much better than her. I'm more enlightened than she is. All these divvying up life. Where I stand in life, judging. Am I better? Am I worse? these kinds of things that they kind of tear apart the fabric of life. They kind of tear apart the basic goodness of life. So there's this koan, which has to do with Master Uman, who's one of the great masters of Chinese Zen. And in the koan, Uman says, every day is a good day. Every day is a good day, right? And this disturbed me when I was working on this koan. And I went to Shishin Roshi. And I said, well, yeah, every day is a good day. Right. How about all the starving children and about all the wars and all this stuff, we know all this stuff, right? What about all that stuff? And he said, this every day is a good day. Well, we have to put it in context for one thing. Uman lived at a time in China. Most of his adult life was spent after the fall. He saw the fall of the Tang Dynasty, which had been a relatively stable dynasty, civilization that lasted for, I don't know how long, centuries. I'm not a historian, but a long time. And a lot of the time that he functioned as a teacher and abbot of a temple happened during a period called the Five Dynasties, which is in 10th century China, which meant there's 5 dynasties, like in a very short time. Every few years there's another dynasty, which means every few years there's another rebellion, another war. And in between the wars disrupt everything, so people can't grow crops, so there's famine too. And so during some of those periods that in which Zen really flourished, I don't know if this is true exactly of Uman's time, but during the time just after the sixth ancestor, when the Zen started to spread widely in China, it said that something like a third of the population died. So, this is a big deal to be living in these times and say every day is a good day. So what does that mean? It's somewhat like the times we're in, right? Our times are not as bad as that. So, yet, but who knows, right? There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees of what is to come, ever. So our practice is one of the things that attracted me to Zen way back in the day was that I read somewhere that the true practitioner of Zen is at home in every situation. I thought, I'd like that. I'd like to be at home in every situation. Is that true? It's, I don't know if it's absolutely true, but it's true at least in part. Because when we stop reacting to everything we don't like and every way in which we think life should be different, when we start accepting life as it is moment to moment, then what is there to react to? When we really know in a deep way the oneness and interconnectedness of our life, what is there to fear? Everything is us. Everything's me. So what is there to fear? Yeah, some parts of me I like, some parts of me I don't like, more than others. But isn't that the way we are as individuals, right? I sometimes think that the things we panic about, we're all part of one body, as is said in Zen, right? We don't often feel that way. A lot of times we feel individual, isolated, at risk, all these things. But if we look at our one body, physical body, I don't know how many, Echo, you probably know, you're a nurse, you probably know how many skin cells we shed every day. Every day we shed myriad skin cells, hundreds, thousands, I don't know. Now you can imagine if each of those skin cells thought of itself as an individual instead of as part of a body. I mean, everyone's going down going, oh no, it's over, woe is me, right? But imagine how much pain we'd experience, every day if every time a skin cell dropped off, we had to, or the larger self reacted that way. In terms of the larger self, somehow we have to gain an acceptance of life that includes all the difficulty. That's the only thing finally that works. Of course, that doesn't mean we're immune or we don't do anything about the difficulty. The absolute view, the view of oneness, in the view of oneness and the view of the greater universe, there's creation, there's destruction, there's species dying out, there's this, there's that. The universe at large doesn't seem to divvy up things into what it likes and what it doesn't like and what's good and what's bad. In the big picture, life just goes on the way it goes on. And it doesn't listen to us anyway when we want it to be different. So what are we going to do, As human beings, however, we still have to act out of compassion. We still have to try and reduce suffering, right? We still have to try and do what we can do to make things better for people who are hurting, even at times when we're not hurting. So, but if we're fighting with life, as it is, the fact that it contains this mix of good and bad, that's what caused me so much suffering for so many years. Thinking I could fix the world, or I should fix the world, or the world should be fixed. I do think the world should be fixed, but I'm probably not going to do it this time around, right? I think we could all do better as human beings, and I hope we get the chance to do that. I really do. And I'm going to do what I can to contribute to that. I think it all comes down to human consciousness and growing human consciousness, which, guess what the best tool for that is? Meditation. So these are the tools we have for opening ourselves up so that we realize the oneness and act from that. It's said that the Buddha, at the moment of his awakening, said, I and all beings and the great earth are at once awakened, or at once enlightened. So his enlightenment was not individual, it wasn't personal, it was for all. It included all things. There's no finally barrier. If we think we're separate from the universe, go ahead and remove yourself from it. Go ahead, give it a try. I'm just going to get out of here. We've all tried to do it, haven't we? We've had a really bad period in our lives, and we've thrown ourselves down our bed and we said, take me now, I want to go. You can't go by will, right? We're not really in charge. We're part of the universe. We're not going to, we can't get out of here, Even, who knows what happens when we die to our consciousness, but everything that's physical in us goes back to the earth, right? Everything's recycled. There's no, basically, Pema Chodron's book is called The Wisdom of No Escape, right? We're here, this is where we live, what are we going to do about it? That's what it comes down to, So when I get into trouble when I've gotten into trouble in the past, is when I try and generalize about the world. I think, oh, this is, this life, this world is not so good. It's kind of a bad deck of cards we've been dealt, that doesn't lead anywhere. It's not helpful. I let enough of my concern about the world to come in that I keep working to help people experience this oneness, which is what's going to help us finally as a species. We have to know that we're all part of one thing, that we are all one thing, not even part of, we're all exactly one thing, if we're going to get out of this mess that we're in at this point in our history. But, I just have to remind myself that the good doesn't need, that the world doesn't need our critiques, our generalities. It's immune to them anyway. And so back to my conversation with Shishin Roshi, he said, finally, well, we have to call it. He said, what about all this bad stuff? He started out by saying, Uman's saying, every day is a good day. In the big sense, this good is so big that it encloses everything we think of as bad. That almost did it for me. But then I kept nudging and asking more questions. And he said, we have to call it the good. We have to call our life the good. And I said, why? And he said, well, if we call it anything else, it doesn't function. we don't function if we think our life is not fundamentally the good, you know. Actually, if we look at it closely, just like I pointed out, most moments are good, right? Most days, do we experience more cooperation than negativity? Sure, most days, I'm not saying bad stuff doesn't happen. I'm not saying that. It does happen. But who made the clothes you're wearing? Who made the cushion or couch or floor you're sitting on? Who who grew the food? Who transported the food that you ate? Uh, who set it out in the market? Uh, who'd you pay at the cash till? All that's cooperation, right? Who made the money that you paid with at the cash till? You know, the list just goes on and on. Who made the car? Who mined the ore that made the car? Who mined the ore that made the cash till? You know, whatever. All these things came out of cooperation, right? On a given day, there's so many instances of cooperation, and by comparison, the negative things that happen are relatively rare. So I don't see any problem on balance with calling it the good. It's just the bad stuff is so bad sometimes, isn't it? It's hard to deal with it. Almost seems for a minute to outweigh the good, but we have to remember. Well, like Shishiroshi said, we have to call it the good. We have to appreciate and love our lives. The whole thing doesn't work otherwise, right? So this is what we're doing when we're sitting in meditation. We're letting go of all those little parasitic thoughts and thought patterns and stories that chip away at that goodness. And don't they? I'm not good enough. So-and-so's not good enough. So-and-so did this to me. You know, so-and-so deserves that. So I'm Mr. Retribution. I'm going to get back at so-and-so. You know, all those proliferating. I'm not saying you block the emotion. Sometimes we feel sad. Sometimes we feel angry. Sometimes we feel rightly angry or even enraged. But these proliferating thoughts that we start to mistake for reality can literally poison our lives, you know? So when we say growing consciousness, we're talking about releasing the internal barriers that keep us hemmed in. We don't actually have to grow consciousness. It's or enlightenment, or our true nature. If we drop the barriers, it just comes out. You know, so that's the practice that we're doing. So I urge you all to practice diligently